Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, DAP Learning Series, a deep dive into audience reports. I'm very excited to be presenting to the DAP community today. I'd like to give a big thank you to the Digitalgov team for, as always, doing a wonderful job hosting us. We really appreciate the technical support and being able to present these webcasts to the larger DAP community. So we have about an hour. I'd like to go through this material in about 50 minutes so that we have about 10 minutes to answer any questions. Today is a new type of webcast that we are really excited to dive into. Now we're going to do a deep dive into the audience reports in DAP Google Analytics. Now a lot of this is going to be illustrating how to use the tool. So we're going to be doing some interesting on-the-fly analysis to help you better explore DAP audience data and to get you thinking and even possibly inspired in how you might use this data to better understand your audience and glean additional insights about how they're using your website. So let's get started. Now, for most folks on this webcast, you're likely brand new to DAP. Now, we probably have some seasoned folks on here who have been longtime DAP users. The purpose of today's webcast is really geared towards helping new folks who are new to DAP and helping the broader audience understand the audience reports. Now, I'm sure most of us on this webcast today probably feel a little overwhelmed by all the different metrics available in DAP reporting. You probably feel like Andy on Parks and Rec. If you've ever seen any of our webcasts in the past, I always like to reference Andy because this is typically what people look like when we present on DAP Google Analytics. So all to say, if you feel this way as we're going through this material, that's okay. Anything new is going to be challenging and it's going to be confusing. So just bear with us as we go through this material and make sure to keep notes of any questions that you have, and we'll do our best at the very end to either answer your questions or follow up on your specific questions after today's webcast. So let's dive in. So what's our challenge? So in the DAP community, our main challenge is interpreting data. Interpreting data in Google Analytics is really tough. Now, many DAP users don't know about or don't know how to use the audience reports or how to interpret the audience reports. We often see just simply a number of folks just pull the all pages report and call it a day. Well, we're here to tell you that there's a lot more really interesting data about your specific audiences. And we're here to show you how you can potentially use that audience data to better clarify and better characterize the data sets that you're pulling today. Now, we all have our regular reporting that our stakeholders ask for, but our main question is, how do we improve this? How do we improve our website experience for the public? How do we serve the public better through our websites by using DAP Google Analytics data? And how do we figure out, are we reaching the appropriate audience? Is what we're marketing to our audience resonating with them? This is what we're going to be talking about today and kind of guiding you through with this webinar on audience data in Google Analytics. Now, in terms of pulling reporting, we can't do all of these things if we only pull one report and call it a day. Like I mentioned before, we often see a lot of folks just kind of look at this in a binary way and say, okay, I've pulled my page views in my all pages report, that's all I'm going to do. Well, there's a lot more data and we're really excited to jump into this. So really the purpose of today is to show you the power of the audience reports, how to use them, and really the goal here is to help you learn and know just enough to be dangerous so that you can help get the data, get into the tool and get out of it and help you figure out how to explore it. So why we're here today. As a DAP user, you've probably at some point received certain questions from your stakeholders, your leadership, about who is our audience? How do audiences differ? How do different audiences use the site? How does our marketing resonate with them? What devices are people using to browse our site? And many more. So really, the big question is how do we answer all of these questions? You can't do that with the all pages report. right? You have to go somewhere else, and that place is the audience reports within Google Analytics. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to do a deep dive into the audience reports and help you unlock the power of these reports to answer all of these questions. So we're going to help illustrate so that you can learn how to interpret this data by using the audience reports with secondary dimensions and segments.
Just to pause for a second, I think some people are having trouble seeing the screen.
Okay.
So maybe if we switch to full screen mode.
All right, let me very briefly switch to full screen. Okay, how does that look? If folks could please chat and let us know what you see, that would be helpful for us.
Okay. Looks like we're getting a couple people to see it, so.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll pick up where I left off. So really what we're going to do today is we're going to do some on-the-fly analysis to help illustrate how to think about the audience reports, how to use them with secondary dimensions and segments. So we're going to be doing a lot of on-the-fly exploring to help you understand from our perspective as analysts, how you can, as an analyst, better use the audience reports to understand how your audience is engaging with your site. So by the end of today's webcast, you're going to know how to think about the audience reports in the context of DAP Google Analytics. You're going to better know how to use the audience reports, and you're going to have focus on which reports give you the most valuable data. We're going to help you cut through the noise to focus on the reports that will give you the most value. We're going to show you how to create powerful audience segmentation, and then we're going to help you better understand how you might further develop your segmentation for your audience by building in campaign URL parameters into different types of audience segmentation. Okay, so before we dive into the audience reports, let's first talk about Google Analytics. Now, for the new folks to the DAP community on this webinar, Google Analytics is simply a tool that tells you the who, the how, and the what. So it tells you who's accessing your site, how they're finding your site, and what they're doing. But it doesn't tell you the why. It doesn't tell you why your audience is doing something specific on your site. You'll need to figure this out. Now, if you've attended previous webinars that we've presented, you'll know that the DAP team highly recommends folks be aware of and document their website mission, your website goals, and the key performance indicators that you use to analyze how well your users are completing your website goals. That is the big puzzle that we have before us. So we're going to be talking about Google Analytics in terms of our audience today. So that is the who, right? That's one part of this equation. Now, how to think about Google Analytics. So Google Analytics literally knows nothing about your site. You literally have to teach Google Analytics about your digital strategy. Now, luckily, you have this great resource, which is DAP Google Analytics. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of what is tracked and advising folks on how to pull reports and how to think about strategy. But ultimately, to be successful with Google Analytics, for everyone here in this webinar, you need to know what is your content strategy? How is your site organized? What is your marketing strategy? Who's your audience that you're trying to cater to? Who's your audience that you're trying to get to resonate with different marketing efforts? And then how do you define success? This is a lot. This is why I said at the beginning, you probably feel like Andy from Parks and Rec, and that's okay. We're going to kind of walk you through how to think about these reports within the audience section of Google Analytics and how you might use them. Now, continuing on, Google Analytics is like a puzzle. Google Analytics gives you a bunch of puzzle pieces, but it doesn't tell you how to put the puzzle together. This is our job as analysts, and this is what we'll focus on today in the audience reports. So like I mentioned before, I'm going to be illustrating live how to think about audience reports, walk through them, use secondary dimensions and segments to help you better see how you could put some of this into action when you go back to your Google Analytics reporting tomorrow. Okay, so let's talk about the audience reports in context. So here's how to think about the audience reports. Again, Google Analytics is a tool that tells you the who, the how, and the what. Now, the who, this is the audience reporting in Google Analytics. On the right-hand side of this screen, you will see I've highlighted the audience section of reports. This tells you who engages with your site. The how, this is the acquisition section. The what, this is the behavior section. Now for today, we're going to be focusing on audience because this tells us who is engaging with our site. So we are only focusing on one piece of this puzzle, and that is who is our audience. So we're going to be using the audience reports. The other sections of Google Analytics will be talked about in future webinars where we'll do deep dives into how to use those. But for today, we're going to be focused on the audience. Okay, before we dive into the audience reports, let's talk a little bit about how Google Analytics collects audience data. Well, for new folks on the webinar, Google Analytics needs to fire JavaScript to be able to track anything about your audience. So if your website does not have Google Analytics JavaScript being tracked, if you don't have DAP Google Analytics implemented, you're not going to have any data about your audience. So it is imperative that if you want to better understand your audience, you have to have the DAP Google Analytics JavaScript snippet implemented on your site. Without that, you have no data. Now, when the Google Analytics JavaScript fires, Google Analytics is looking at a lot of different data sets. And we like to think about this and use the analogy of a backpack. So imagine you're going from site to site. Any site you go to where Google Analytics is implemented, Google is tracking location, pages visited, device type, demographic data, on-site search, different queries, referral sites. There's a lot of different dimensions and metrics that Google Analytics is tracking about your journey to a specific site. So it's within this JavaScript snippet when it fires that is tracking the audience data about your traffic. Now, let's jump a little bit into the audience reports. Now, I like to tell folks when we're doing the different in-person trainings or different webinars, it's okay if this doesn't make sense at first. Anything new is going to be confusing. So just jump in and follow along and then practice at home. You will get better over time. The important thing is just jump in, explore the tool, test out different hypotheses using the data, and see if you're able to pull reporting from an audience perspective. And we're going to illustrate that over the next number of slides and kind of walk through the logic of pulling both secondary dimensions and segments in terms of how do we pull audience reporting. It's okay if you make mistakes. Analytics is not accounting. You know, data is directional, and this is really tough stuff. It is really difficult to interpret data and know how to pull it. I will also say, for folks on the webinar, more than likely, you have a very different workflow in how you pull this data. So if you have a very different workflow in how you pull secondary dimensions within audience reports or how you use reports, that's okay. There is no one set way to do this. I'm simply going to illustrate in real time how I prefer to pull different data sets within the audience reports. Okay, so let's start from a 30,000-foot view. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see all of the reports within the audience section of Google Analytics that we're going to cover today. Now, let me illustrate this within DAP Google Analytics. On my screen, you will see that I've chosen the time range of August 14th through August 17th. The reason I'm doing such a small time range is because it takes longer to process data, and we only have a limited amount of time on this webinar today. So I want to make sure that we get through everything and touch upon all the different topics. Now, I've already opened up the toggle of the audience reports. So this is the audience section that we're talking about today. Now you'll see here I've highlighted in blue on the right-hand side of your screen the different reports that we're going to be talking about today. I like to call these the greatest hits. These are the reports that you're most often going to use to help drill into and go exploring in your data. So let's dive into the overview report together. Now, I like to recommend for anyone new to DAP, always start with the overview report. This gives you a high-level overview of all the different dimensions and metrics available in a report. So let's look at this together. Now, I've already loaded the audience report. Now, as an analyst, if this is my first time coming into DAP, I'm going to start looking around, okay, what's available to me? Now, for the purposes of our exercises today, I'm going to be using the GSA agency profile. Obviously, for everyone on the webinar, you would need to choose your specific agency profile that is applicable to your specific work. But for today, I'm going to use GSA just as an example. So as an analyst, I'm looking through this data, and I see here we've got users, new users, sessions, page views. We've got demographic data, language, country, city. We've got technical data, browser, operating system, right? Mobile, we have service provider, operating system, language. There's a lot of stuff here. Now, what I want to call out immediately is users. Let's talk a little bit about users. Now, users is a complicated metric, and I want to call this out briefly because this is a very misunderstood metric. If you attended our last webinar, we talked about misunderstood metrics, and users was one of those metrics. I highly recommend folks on this webinar to please go to our YouTube channel and watch our webinar on misunderstood metrics. Now, most folks will think that it's okay to pull users reporting, but as with anything in data, there are always caveats, there are always nuances to be aware of. So let's talk about those. So the long and short of it is that users is a complicated metric. So let's back up. What is a user? A user is a person who visits a site or app. Now, a user is defined by a cookie in your browser. So this is not actually a person, right? So reporting is never going to be an accurate measure of the actual number of people browsing your site because a user is defined by a cookie. Now, think about it this way. If you're accessing a website on 3 different devices, let's say you start in the morning on your MacBook or on your Windows laptop, and then you browse a site on your mobile phone and then a tablet at night, because of how cookies define a user on different browsers, you're actually going to be counted as 3 different users. So your user count could potentially be counting 3 different users when you're actually only one person accessing 3 different websites on 3 different devices. So that's the first caveat. Now, the other caveats, the definition of the type of user you appear as in reporting. So for example, new versus returning. This totally depends on the date range chosen in reporting. This gets complicated really fast. So this is also why you need to be careful about how you interpret and use user data in the audience reports. Now, we used to recommend reporting on the percentage share of new versus returning users. We used to. That is the operative term there. Let's talk about that. Recently, in March 2019, ITP 2.1, Intelligent Tracking Prevention, hit in Safari browsers. This is a new enhancement in Safari browsers. Where do we have Safari browsers? They're on Mac laptops, iPhones, iPads. These are all the default browser within the iOS ecosystem. Now, by default, Google Analytics cookies expire after 24 months, but with ITP 2.1, this limits your cookies to 7 days. So after 7 days, you're then considered a new user. This is going to have and already has had a significant impact to your user data in reporting. So the users metric in audience reporting is less meaningful in light of ITP 2.1. The main takeaway here is take the users metric with a grain of salt. Consider not reporting on new versus returning users. If you absolutely want to report on users, I would recommend considering reporting on the percentage increase or decrease in total volume of users. But tread very carefully with the users metric. Now, typically from DAP perspective, we typically recommend you think about sessions, right? Sessions include everything that happens on the site for one user. So to us, a session is much more meaningful. So just want to be careful with the user's metrics and how you interpret that as we're going through the audience data. Tread carefully. So users, I'm sure a lot of people here are either confused, they don't like that. That's okay. You probably feel like Michael Scott, no problem. Just kind of put that on the back burner for now, and we're going to start exploring the audience reports together. Okay, so here's the methodology with how we're going to explore the data together today. So within the greatest hits of audience reporting, we're going to be using secondary dimensions to illustrate how to use your audience data. So I'm going to be overlaying the following secondary dimensions: default channel grouping, landing page, and page. We're then going to create one segment on the fly to illustrate how to think about how you could potentially use some of your audience data to understand performance in other reports, like in the landing pages report or the all pages report. Now, on my screen right now, you'll see kind of a diagram of all of the different things that we've talked about before in previous webinars. These are all the functionality that you need to be aware of. Now, in terms of how I'm going to be presenting this today to you, I'm going to be looking at secondary dimensions, which is in the red circle at the very bottom. And I'm going to be creating segments on the fly to illustrate the thought process through which an analyst thinks about incorporating audience data into segments, into secondary dimensions to further clarify your reporting data. Okay, so let's talk about audience demographics. Now, on the right-hand side is the section of reporting in Google Analytics. So let me go there real quick. I'm going to go to audience, demographics, and overview. Remember, check your overview to understand what types of data you have there. Now, as we see here, we've got different age bands and we have gender. So that right out of the box is really interesting. Now I'm going to go over to age. And let's talk a little bit more about this. Now, within Google Analytics, Google tracks age bands, as you can see here. So we've got, I'm going to change this to sessions. And we've got a number of different age bands here that Google is able to track. Now, when a user is logged into their gmail.com email address, this data is picked up by Google when JavaScript fires. We collect anonymized data, so there's no PII in here. And we get these interesting trends about different age bands so that we can infer, segment, slice and dice our data to understand engagement with our site. So automatically out of the box, we see here, we have some really interesting demographic data with age bands. Now you'll see here, we've got age overlaid with our acquisition metrics, our behavior metrics. This is really powerful and gets really useful depending on how you slice and dice this, right? You can understand that the age band of 25 to 34 is responsible for bringing in the highest percentage share of sessions to every website within the GSA agency profile. So that's pretty interesting stuff. You can further whittle down to your specific site and better understand from a specific URL how that age band engages with a URL on your site. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that. So I'm going to add in a secondary dimension of default channel grouping to show you the marketing channel that they came in on, show you the landing page, and then show you the page. I'm going to do that by age and gender. So let me illustrate that. Here's how you need to do it when you go exploring in your reporting. I'm going to click on secondary dimension, and I'm going to type in default channel grouping. Now, for more seasoned DAP folks in the community, I'm sure you already know this. For the new folks here, basically, I'm adding in a secondary dimension for default channel grouping. Default channel grouping is the marketing channel. This is the roll-up channel. Now, immediately, I have qualified my age bands to show what marketing channel these different age bands are engaging with to find our sites in the GSA profile. Now, this is pretty interesting. This gets super interesting really fast. Now, in addition to that, I've still got my acquisition metrics, behavior, and I'm able to pinpoint, slice and dice this data to potentially answer questions that I'm getting from my stakeholders. Now, let's look at landing page. Let's understand where these different age bands are landing on multiple sites. Now, I'm going to add in landing page. Google Analytics is thinking. Now it renders all of the landing pages. These are where your traffic enters for the first time and where Google Analytics starts capturing a session and then everything else after that. Now we see here 25 to 34, USA.gov/passport. This is the top landing page. Now I'm going to go in here and add in an advanced filter, and I'm going to choose landing page. And I'm going to qualify this, and USA.gov/passport is actually our test URL for today's exercises. I'm going to type this in because I only want to see USA.gov/passport. Now, I am going to remove that one, and I'm just going to filter off of this secondary dimension. Now you'll see here, I very quickly have sliced and diced my data so that I'm able to get a full list of all the different age bands engaging with URLs that contain USA.gov/passport. Now I have engagement data, session level data. I have bounce rate. I'm able to very quickly figure out which age band is bouncing at the highest rate from USA.gov/passport, right? That is super useful information. And it may be really interesting for you to look at from a UX perspective in how you want to improve the website experience for your user base. Now, additionally, let me go in here and choose the page dimension. Again, we're still exploring this data, and we're showing you how to do this in real time to better understand how to understand age, demographic data, and leverage different secondary dimensions to glean additional insights. Now, I've added in the page level dimension. Now, typically with pages, you want to look at different session level data, different engagement data. So adding in these secondary dimensions is super helpful in terms of how you explore it. That's the big takeaway here. Now, let's talk about how we build a segment. So you don't have to always use secondary dimensions. You can use a tool called a segment. Now, a segment is a session level tool where you can program it to basically say, hey, Google, show me only data that conforms with my specific business rules. So let's talk about this. Now, I've already talked about age. When we go into gender, we can then see female versus male. We see our acquisition metrics, our behavior metrics, etc. Now, what if we wanted to understand the engagement of a particular segment of audience for looking at male users between the ages of 25 to 34 and comparing them with female users between the ages of 25 to 34 for the landing page USA.gov/passport. What does that audience engagement look like and how do they contrast and compare? Let's talk about that. So I'm going to build a segment that shows these two groups. So let's do that briefly. So for folks who are not aware of how to build a segment, just follow along at home. I'm going to do this on the fly to show you the thought process through which you need to create these. So I'm going to call this male 25 to 34. And I'm going to be creating a female segment with the ages of 25 to 34 as well. So within a segment, I'm going to choose 25 to 34 and male. And you'll see here this automatically updates. I'm going to save this segment. And then I'm going to create another segment for female, ages 25 to 34. I'm going to choose 25 to 34 and female. And you'll see here this updates, letting me know that the segment logic works. Now, the question here was, how do we compare two segments to compare these different age and gender demographic data points on the landing page usa.gov/passport, right? These are folks who are looking to get a passport, either a new one or renew it. So how do we do that? Well, we need to look at the landing page. So let's go to the landing page. Now, segments are nice because segments follow you across reports within the standard reports. Now, I'm in the landing page here. I've got male, my male segment, and my female segment. Now, if we scroll down, we see a lot of different data here. I'm going to need to create a filter for usa.gov/passport to filter specifically for the landing page usa.gov/passport. Now, here are my segments applied, male and female, for usa.gov/passport. Now we see here we've got 1,700, actually we've got 2,310 sessions versus 2,494 female sessions. We also have another page here, passport problems. So you can quickly see how quickly you can go in and segment your data to understand interesting insights about it. Now, some of you may think or feel like we're looking at this data in a vacuum, and that's correct. You need to let your business questions that you receive from your stakeholders guide your reporting. Now, you need to know your website mission, goals, and KPIs to be able to answer those questions. So there's some other work at your agency that you need to do up front to help understand the context through which you actually pull this data. So we've looked at age and gender. We've looked at adding secondary dimensions to explore the data and creating a segment to also explore the data. So let's move on to the next section, audience and geo. Now, we're looking in the geo section at language and location. So let's briefly talk about this. I'm gonna go back to audience. We go to geo, and I'm gonna go to language. Now let's explore these using secondary dimensions. Now I'm gonna remove these segments. I'm gonna click apply. And now we have kind of our default view here. So let's look at the language tab here. Now we've got language. This is taken from the browser that your users are using to access your site. Now again, we have the acquisition and behavior metrics overlaid here. So this is really useful. You get the sessions, you get the bounce rate. One way you may want to use this particular report is to understand how you want to cater particular parts of your site. Let's say you have a high session count for the Spanish language. You may want to have a Spanish version of your site. You can use this data to figure that out. Next, we have location. Now we've got country here, right? This shows you in general where is all this traffic coming from. You can toggle over to city, continent, subcontinent, and so on. So the sky's the limit here with how you use these reports. Now let's look at a couple examples using secondary dimensions to further qualify this data. So I'm going to add in a secondary dimension of default channel grouping and landing page. And in the interest of time, I'm going to just choose default channel grouping so that we can get through all the material today. So I'm going to go back to language. And again, I'm going to choose a secondary dimension of default channel grouping. Now this is going to show me an overlay of marketing channel with browser language. Now let's say I wanted to understand Spanish language traffic accessing our site. I'm going to search for ES-ES because that's Spanish within Google Analytics data. And then once this loads, we'll see all of the marketing channels where users are finding all of the sites within the GSA agency profile. That's how powerful this tool is. It is almost too flexible for its own good, but it gives you a lot of really interesting ways to slice and dice your information to answer specific questions. Now, I could do the exact same thing with location. So let me go into location and add in a secondary dimension of channel. Now I have location and default channel grouping overlaid with each other along with my acquisition metrics of sessions and then behavior metrics. Now let's talk about how, let's look at just United States. Now I've got only United States showing up here, and I have a mix of default channel groupings, my marketing channels that are sending traffic from the United States to my sites in the GSA profile. Now, this is super useful in understanding where your traffic's coming from, what are the channels through which people are accessing your site. So use this in answering any types of business questions that you get from your stakeholders. You just need to make sure to know what type of question you're trying to answer. Okay, now let's say we wanted to build a segment using this geo data. Let's say somebody asks you to build a segment showing traffic from San Francisco via organic search that lands on usa.gov/passport. So let's illustrate this. I'm going to reset my report here, and I'm going to build a segment that shows traffic from San Francisco landing on usa.gov/passport from organic search. So I'm going to create a segment with audience data. I'm going to call this San Francisco audience data. And I'm going to define in my segment my traffic sources and the city. So I typically go to conditions and I type in here. So I'm going to do channel, organic search, and city contains San Francisco. Now I'm going to sanity check this here just to see if data does show up, and it does. So I know that this passes the sniff test and I have data here. So I'm going to save this. It's called San Francisco audience data. And I'm going to apply this to the landing pages report once this loads. Okay, so I'm going to go to behavior, site content, landing pages, and I'm going to specify usa.gov/passport. In my filter. Now I've used audience data with the city of San Francisco. I've combined some marketing data with organic search. And now I've created a segment, and now I've isolated traffic from San Francisco entering usa.gov passport from organic search. This is how powerful this tool is. This is how you need to think about using your audience data by layering it into segments, into secondary dimensions, to slice and dice your data and figure out how to answer specific questions. This is how you do it. This is the thought process. Okay, let's talk about audience technology. So under technology, under the audience section of the browser, is browser and OS and network. Now this is one of my favorite reports. So let's take a look at that. So if you scroll down to technology, you'll see browser and OS. Now, why is browser and OS important? Now, once this page loads, we'll be able to see a lot of interesting technical details. I'm going to remove this segment that I had on before from San Francisco and organic search. Now I see my browser. I see the types of browsers. I see all the engagement data. I've got OS, screen resolution, screen colors, etc. This is useful for understanding how your audience is engaging with your site. So if there's a particular version of a browser that your audience base is not using or uses very infrequently, you can basically go to your development team and say, hey, we don't need to support such and such a browser because we're not seeing a long-term trend of people using it. This is how you can use audience data to improve the UX, improve the site experience, and help you better manage what budget you put towards supporting different types of browsers and different types of devices. Now let's talk about network. This is a really powerful tool. Now we've got service provider. We've got hostname here. Now, hostname is simply all of the websites that appear within an agency profile. So you see here in the GSA profile, we have login.gov, USA.gov, GSA.gov, FBO.gov, and so on. Now, if we toggle over to service provider, I want to show you what appears here when we search for general administration services. Bear with us here 1 second. Whoop, I apparently can't spell today, so let me just type in general services. And there we go. So now service provider, we've got general services administration. Now, what is this? Well, the government does a really good job at letting analytics tools know the traffic from different government agencies hitting your site. So if you want to understand more about your audience from other government agencies engaging with your site, go to service provider under the network report and start playing around with the data. Just look for specific government agencies. Now, I'm going to type in state just to see if we can find the State Department as an example. So here we go. We've got U.S. Department of State, and they drove 12,361 sessions to all of the sites within the GSA profile. Now let's further clarify this by looking at landing page. Let's see exactly where this traffic from the State Department is landing on GSA-owned websites. Okay, so it looks like the top page that U.S. State Department traffic is landing is actually on the secure.login.gov page. Makes sense. So this is how to really slice and dice and further qualify the audience data that Google Analytics captures out of the box for you so that you can understand engagement between service provider from different government agencies and where they land. So super powerful report. Now, let's add some additional secondary dimensions in there. We can also choose default channel grouping like we've been doing. So let's see what this looks like. So overall, what this means here, we see referral is the top default channel grouping for the Department of State. Referral traffic is traffic from any third-party website. So we see overall 6,384 sessions coming from external sites sending Department of State traffic to a GSA-owned website. So you can see the opportunity here with how you can slice and dice audience data using additional secondary dimensions. Now let's talk a little bit about how you can see all the different government agencies accessing sites in our profile and then build a segment. Now, let's say we wanted to see all of the .gov traffic landing on different landing pages within the GSA profile. How you can do this is you can actually create a segment that says network domain contains .gov. Now I'm going to save this. And let's see what populates here. Now I'm going to remove the secondary dimension. And I just want to see all of the service providers that are accessing all of my websites in the GSA profile. Now let's look at this. I'm going to expand this to show 100 rows. So we've got all of these different service providers: State Department, U.S. Postal Service, United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, There's a ton in here with .gov domains. This is how you can further segment and slice and dice your data to figure out who is my audience, how are they accessing the site, right? The sky's the limit with how you use this data and how you transform it to answer specific questions. Okay, let's continue on. We've got mobile reporting, we've got overview, and we've got devices. So let's take a quick look at this to better understand how to use mobile. Now, obviously, mobile is important because you have three main types of devices accessing your website: desktop, mobile, tablet. I'm going to remove this segment. Now, here is what we call in the industry the three-screen view: desktop, mobile, and tablet. Again, you can use this data, you can further use secondary dimensions to qualify where specifically these device categories are accessing different URLs on your site. Now, in the GSA agency profile, I'm just going to pull up just very generally to show you all the landing pages where the different device types are landing, but this is how you need to think about it. So we see here, desktop overall is accessing secure.login.gov with the most traffic. Now, let's go into devices. This is a pretty cool report because it shows you all of the mobile device info. So here we see Apple iPhone, iPad, Samsung. There's a ton of data here, right? We have mobile device branding. A lot of interesting qualifications here. You could create some really interesting reporting for your developer to basically say, hey, we need our website to support these primary devices in a mobile experience. Help us do that. You could use that data to make that case. So that's the power of the mobile reporting. Now, let's build a segment showing traffic from mobile devices and folks at the US Senate accessing various sites in the GSA profile. You can do that. I'm going to build a segment. I'm going to call this mobile. And I'm going to choose conditions. I'm going to choose device category. Call this mobile. And remember service provider? I'm going to choose service provider. And I'm going to type in Senate, just out of curiosity. Let's see what shows up. United States Senate. Now, we do have some data here. So this is just for illustration purposes. So I'm going to save this segment. And I've baked in my audience data into this segment. And now I'm going to apply it to the landing pages report to figure out what pages they're accessing. So I'm going to go down to behavior, site content, landing pages. And now I have a list of pages where traffic on mobile devices from the Senate is landing on these different landing pages. Now, you can get very specific with your specific website. You would just simply filter here in this box by typing in, for example, login.gov. So this is how you need to think about leveraging mobile data. How do you combine it in a way that helps you answer specific questions about your audience engaging with your site? Now, let's put this all together. You can combine many different audience characteristics into one powerful segment. So let's say you received a question from your stakeholders and you needed to combine male users, the age band of 35 to 44, location, Washington, DC, devices that run iOS, and then from any government agency ending in .gov. You could do that. So let's do that very quickly to show you how powerful it is when you combine different characteristics of your audience from the audience reports into one powerful segment that you can then overlay on any standard report in Google Analytics. So let's do that right now. I'm going to call this combined segment. And I'm going to do male users, age band of 35 to 44. So I'm going to go in here, check off 35 to 44, male users. Location, I'm going to choose Washington as the city. So I need to go here to location. And notice how all of this is audience data from the audience section of Google Analytics. So city contains Washington. It nicely automatically populates the different values there for you. Now, devices that run iOS. I'm going to go to technology. And for operating system, I'm going to type in iOS and see what pops up. And it does pop up. And next and finally, I'm going to say from any government agency ending in .gov. So combination of network domain will give me any traffic coming from a .gov network. So I'm going to go to conditions, type in network domain contains .gov. And actually, I'm going to remove that one. I'm going to save this segment. I need to go back in there, remove this one, and further qualify and remove the network domain, just in the interest of time so that we can get through the rest of the material. Okay. Let me remove that. Now, it's very likely we're being sampled here. You'll notice the shield changed colors. So let me go back in here. And change the date range. And what you're seeing here is just what we do on a daily basis to help troubleshoot and identify different data points. Go back to okay, let me remove my filter here once this loads. Okay, so folks, I need to move on. For some reason, it's not displaying data, likely being sampled here. Now, one thing I wanted to speak about, you can further clarify your segments using Campaign URL Builder. Now, what you see here on this slide is that in the campaign name, you can specify anything. You could call this whatever you want. So if you're able, in your email promotion, if you're able to segment out your email lists, you can start building very powerful segmentation using different characteristics of how you want to classify your audience. So in the left-hand screen here, we see I've classified segment. I've classified the Senate as part of the campaign name. Now, for everyone here, I'm sure you're familiar with UTM parameters and campaign marketing, campaign reporting. You can then create powerful segments off of campaign name. So you could actually define your segments up front in your email campaigns to register as Senate newsletter August 2019 in your reporting. Or on the right-hand side, you could classify your campaign URLs as State Department newsletter August 2019. Now, this is a more nuanced topic. We don't have enough time to go over this in depth today, but I'm happy to answer any questions offline. So takeaways today, that was a lot, right? Doing this on the fly, this is a lot of work. You know, Google Analytics does a really great job of giving you a ton of data, but you need to know how to use it. The big takeaway here, don't be afraid to explore. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Use your secondary dimensions and segments in the audience data in the reports that we have specifically called out for you. But you need to let your website mission goals and questions from your stakeholders guide you as to how you're going to pull your audience data. Now, If you have any questions, I'll try to answer as many as I can in the last few minutes that we have. But for any folks who have any follow-up questions, the DAP team is always here to answer and help you. You email us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. So Rhett, how many questions do we have? And let's try and see if we can answer some of them.
So right now, we only have one question. It's, will the presenter share your slides?
Yes, we will of course share our slides. This will of course be a video that we upload to YouTube on our YouTube channel. So by all means, please contact us with any questions and we'll definitely follow up. For any feedback, we really appreciate your feedback and we'll be sending out a survey to get that feedback. By all means, please provide us with feedback. We're always looking to improve upon this. This is a new type of webinar that we did today where we do a deep dive. So by all means, please let us know how it worked. We definitely want to take your feedback into consideration as we further mold and craft these types of experiences. And I hope that this was helpful for folks to see how an analyst engages with audience data and uses it to slice and dice and hopefully answer your questions about audience engagement. Thank you folks for attending and looking forward to the next webinar.